Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the program. We really appreciate you being with us this morning. Got a special treat for you. Please welcome to the program for the first time. We have conservative author, historian, his Mr. Jay Cost is on the line. Jay, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Yes, my audience is going to know who you are just because I've referenced your book several times on the air over the last couple of years. One of my favorites, it's called A Republic No More, Big Government and the Rise of American Political Corruption. I'm going to show it to him on the screen here, Jay. I especially love the very beginning where we talk about legal graft. We cover a lot of that on the program about how when the government does something, it's somehow legal, but if you and I were to do it, it might be illegal or unethical. Just talk a little bit about that, please.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, usually when we think about corruption, we think of money in a brown paper bag, or we think maybe about Abscam. I don't know if any of your listeners remember Abscam from the early 80s. It's shakedown by the government dressed as Arab sheiks. That's usually what we think about. But I think that we should understand corruption more broadly. Is really anytime corruption happens when the government plays favorites in a way that doesn't benefit the whole country. And I think, in the course of researching and writing The Republic No More, one of the things that I found was that the government tends to play favorites with people who are wealthy and well-connected. I mean, nowadays we associate, well, if you want to help the poor, you're in favor of big government. But I think that big government just as often helps the wealthy and the well-connected who are able to basically use their political power to line their own pockets, really at the expense of the taxpayers.
That's exactly right. And matter of fact, I've got on your Twitter, I'm going to pull that up here. We're talking with Jay Cost. He is a conservative author, historian. You've also probably read about him, the National Review. The Price of Greatness. This is another book. Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and the Creation of the American Oligarchy. So this wealthy class that can benefit from big government, is that kind of the American oligarchy that you write about in The Price of Greatness?
Yes, the book is sort of an early history of the rise of the wealthy and their role in public policy. Oligarchy is basically derived from the Greek, basically means the rule of the rich. And that book is about how Hamilton wanted to rechannel the self-interest of the wealthy for the sake of the national good, which was a very smart plan. I mean, the book isn't pro-Hamilton or anti-Hamilton or pro-Madison, anti-Madison. Hamilton had a really brilliant idea about recognizing that the wealthy were going to make a bet on the future of the United States, and he wanted to make sure public policy was designed in a way that that the wealthy would bet on their success. But Madison observed this problem, which was that when we bring the wealthy into, we want to make it, yoke the interests of the wealthy toward the public good. It's actually a two-way street. One of the problems that happened in the early days of our government was public policy got retooled in important ways to benefit the wealthy. And this is actually what brought about the first political parties that we had in our country between the Federalists and the Republicans.
So to kind of conceptualize this, when we hear the phrase now of draining the swamp, and, there does seem to be, predictably so, an allergy to doing this, I guess, to say it lightly, where people don't, they don't want the gravy train of government. There's a lot of money to be made off of a big government. Do you see that shifting at all in what we've seen President Trump attempt to do, or even some of the things that he's done? There's this giant pushback against what he's trying to do.
Yeah, it's hard to do. I haven't seen any real movement. And I think, it's important to bear in mind that the status quo in Washington, if we say it's corrupt, which I think it is, it nevertheless benefits lots and lots of people, and they're not going to let things change willingly.
I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the Founding Fathers.
They seem to be in full-scale retreat from spending cuts and are talking about raising people's taxes again. And I have only one thing to say to the tax increasers. Go ahead, make my day.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. Those who would trade our freedom for security have embarked on this downward course. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell is on now.
Let's see, can you hear me okay? There we go. Welcome to the program. You have found the intersection of conservative ideas and reality where we are building a liberty machine. We can't do it without you guys. Thanks for starting the beginning of your week with us here. The telephone number is always 870-275-9799 if you want to contribute to the program. You can also sound off over at facebook.com. That's facebook.com/Conduit News. And if you're on the internet, do me a favor, just head on over to the YouTube channel, Conduit News, and subscribe and click the little bell to receive notifications. That would help us out a great deal. That would help us build the Liberty Machine in a big way. We got a great show for you this morning. Coming up at the top of the next hour, we'll be talking with State Representative Brant Smith. He'll be in studio. Then we're going to also talk to State Representative Stephen Meeks. Stephen Meeks will be calling in at 7:33 this morning. I got to talk to Stephen a little bit last week when I was at the Faulkner County luncheon, Tea Party luncheon there, and it was good to talk to him. There was a situation here in the state of Arkansas where the General Assembly, one of their budget committee, they were starting to go over, this happened earlier in the year, it was back during the fiscal session, and they were going over the appropriations request from, all of these state agencies. And it was just really frustrating when we found out that many of these state agencies' appropriations they were requesting were far more than they actually spent or the money that actually ended up, going to them. But yet they were authorized to spend this much more if, the money was there. And so you had some legislators like Stephen Meeks and others who were trying to do something to stop this practice because it's just fiscally irresponsible. Why would we approve you to spend, X amount if you're not even going to have that money in the first place? Anyway, so I'm going to talk to Stephen Meeks about that, and we'll talk about what's going to happen, coming up in the session. A lot of people don't realize this because they don't pay attention, but the Arkansas General Assembly will be convening this coming January in 2019. There's going to be a lot of things to discuss. It's going to be moving very quickly because that's the way it always happens, because you're going to have these legislators creating laws. I wish they would get rid of a lot of laws, not most laws, but a lot of laws that we have on the books. They're going to be doing this in a span of 3 to 4 months. And so it's going to move very fast. So we're going to talk to them next hour. Very excited about that. Let's go ahead and start with the veterans. These people have more courage than I will ever have, than I can't even imagine. When I sit and I think about what happens, in someone's mind when they are willing to serve and go into the military, I am extremely humbled because I just realized, wow, I'm not up to that, and it is just incredible to me that we have so many people who are willing to put their country first, not just in what they say, but in what they do, and that's what veterans have done. And so yesterday was Veterans Day. President Trump was in France as they were commemorating the end of World War I, a very, very bloody conflict. Zero Hedge has an article that is extremely moving. The headline, "When the Guns Fell Silent, Hear the Eerie Quiet That Followed the End of World War I." On the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, an armistice was declared that ended what had been, up until that point, the bloodiest conflict in human history. Millions of citizens in the U.S. and Europe greeted the peace declared 100 years ago on Sunday with jubilation, as it meant the end of 4 years of brutal trench warfare and mechanized slaughter that killed 16 million had finally come to an end. But the impact of the armistice was especially palpable on the front, where heavy artillery had been firing right up to the minute that peace was declared. In a stunning recording released by the British Imperial War Museum on observance of the anniversary, listeners can hear the guns firing on the American front near the River Moselle 1 minute before the armistice was declared. Then, the stunning silence that followed 1 minute later. That is incredible. That's the silence thereafter. Did you hear the birds chirping? It's almost like you could just hear, peace is here. That is just, it just sends chills, down your spine to hear something like that. So, in light of the fact that that was commemorating the end and the peace of World War I. By the way, and I know this is it's not historically accurate, first of all, but if anybody's seen the Robert Downey Jr. version of Sherlock Holmes 2, the one where he actually is, it takes place in 1891, and it's about Moriarty, and he's trying to get basically World War I started, but a couple of decades early. And it's about the amount of money that's made in selling the artillery, and it's also about getting Germany and France to go to war together, but it's all orchestrated. It is absolutely a fantastic movie, in my opinion, and to me it just does give a little bit of insight into this, when it said here in this article, the mechanized slaughter of people. I mean, it really was the first war that was fought on an industrialized scale. And I think, we had no idea at the time as a society just what we were about to unleash on one another, And, of course, I think the culmination of that is at the end of World War II with Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And then I think people were like, whoa, we need to pump the brakes here, So, in light of all of this, Veterans Day yesterday, celebration of the armistice, a celebration of the end of World War I 100 years ago. We have the French president attacking President Donald Trump, essentially saying, show this headline first, French President Emmanuel Macron, nationalism is treason. Now, the mainstream media, they are salivating over the fact that he said this. There was a story a couple of months ago that when you Googled leader of the free world, Google was putting Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany, in the front of the search results because they don't want to admit that Donald Trump and America are the leaders of the free world.
And that's because Donald Trump is a nationalist, meaning he is not for global governance that violates the sovereignty of a people, of America or any other country. Well, now that Angela Merkel has been essentially, the sun is setting, let's say, on Angela Merkel, they now are looking to Emmanuel Macron to take over this, globalist European Union, European Union nation state fantasy, and even though it's failing. But my point is he's their guy now, and so he's the one that has been told by somebody, hey, you need to go out and attack Trump and attack nationalism. Now, in order to do this, folks, he has to do what people on the left in this country do all the time, and that is ignore the reality and, in many cases, the very definitions and meanings of words. And of course, our press here likes to say, well, Trump says he's a nationalist. Now, Trump explains what that means, and it really just means you're a patriot that wants to put America first. Well, of course, they say, don't you really mean you're a white nationalist, sir? Don't you really mean that you're a racist and a KGB agent, and, by the way, you're loyal to Saudi Arabia? Whatever else they want to throw at him. But the global press, they just want to ignore the definitions of words entirely. And what they want to say is, no, actually, nationalism and patriotism are two separate things. Where we have Virgil here over at Breitbart, new article, France's Macron attacks America's Trump and Americans help pay for it. This is a fascinating article. It's a long read. But the Washington Post reported on Sunday this. In the shadow of a grand war memorial here, French President Emmanuel Macron marked the 100th anniversary of the end of World War I by delivering a forceful rebuke against rising nationalism, calling it a betrayal of patriotism, and warning against old demons coming back to wreak havoc, wreak chaos and death. Stop. This, ladies and gentlemen, is projection. He is trying to say that that nationalism is going to be the danger here and going to bring us back to the brink of a World War I type scenario that leaves millions dead with the, again, mechanized slaughter and the trench warfare and everything else. I think President Emmanuel Macron is projecting here. I think he's projecting the very thing he is guilty of, because if you keep pushing the and diminishing the sovereignty, one of the reasons nationalism is on the rise in Europe, in Greece or Italy or some of these other countries, you saw some of it in Ireland. One of the reasons Scotland, they had a referendum so Scotland could leave. One of the reasons Brexit happened is because of people like Emmanuel Macron trying to violate the sovereignty and tell people how they can live when you don't even live there. You're trying to tell people how they can govern themselves. You're taxing them, and then you send that money back with strings attached. That sounds familiar, doesn't it, Arkansas? Doesn't it, Missouri? Doesn't it, Tennessee? This is it's people like Macron who are projecting that could bring us to the point of World War I, because when you want to economically enslave or oppress somebody, guess what it leads to? It leads to taking up arms one way or another. It leads to violence one way or another. So Donald Trump standing for a strong America, nationalism and patriotism, and he is saying, Macron is saying, that nationalism and patriotism are two different things, when if you look the words up in the dictionary, they're pretty much, it's safe to say, interchangeable words. And that's what Virgil says here. Obviously, Macron was aiming his rebuke at President Trump, who was sitting just a few feet away. After all, Trump said just 3 weeks ago, I am a nationalist. And so Macron Macron further jibed him on Sunday. Quote, patriotism is the exact opposite of nationalism. See here, this is what the left has to do. Now, the guy's name is Macron. It's not Merriam-Webster, okay? Patriotism is the exact opposite of nationalism. No, it's not. That is a demonstrably false statement. It can be proven false very easily. Patriotism is not. Now, depends on, I guess, his perspective. If Macron, which I'm assuming he does, believes like President Barack Obama believed, that he's a citizen of the world, then yeah, I guess national. If your patriotism means, well, I'm patriotic to the globe, to the planet, and I want us to have one big global government, well, then yeah, okay. I guess technically maybe that, and that's probably what he's, that's a speculation. That's probably what he means here. Obviously, Macron was aiming to rebuke Trump. The exact opposite. Listen to what Virgil says. The reader might be inclined to reach for a dictionary in search of the difference between those two words, patriotism and nationalism. Actually, don't bother because they are, in fact, interchangeable. Macron's wordplay was dismissed by John O'Sullivan, who's been a conservative sage since his days as an aide to Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. O'Sullivan responded to Macron with a tart tweet. A tart tweet. Nonsense. Patriotism and nationalism overlap greatly as political ideas arising from love of country. Those who want to separate them fully get into linguistic difficulties and produce wildly differing definitions of both. In other words, in his eagerness to zap Trump, Macron is splitting hairs. You see the tweet right there from John O'Sullivan. O'Sullivan, though, is it? I don't even know how this guy talks. He may be more to the Irish and less less proper, as they say. We're going to take a break, folks. What do you think about this, right? I think Macron is projecting the very thing that he is guilty of, which is he is the one that's guilty of resurrecting these demons and the bloodshed that we saw in World War I. He is guilty of the very thing he's accusing President Trump of, in my opinion. We're going to take a break. Back in a minute.
Requires constant effort from voters and constant pressure. Voters to demand that Washington behave more responsibly. And that is something that I don't think we really see. Where, we usually think of political corruption as this separate issue from like health care or taxes or, energy policy. But I think that political corruption is a problem that informs all of our other public policy problems. And in a lot of respects, I think it's almost the first problem in government. And I think that as long as we continue to see corruption as a separate issue, it's always going to be, first of all, corruption is always going to hang around. Question is whether or not it's become intolerable. I think it has. I think the challenge is that voters don't prioritize it as an issue. And unfortunately, we saw this in New Jersey last night, right? Bob Menendez is.
Let's face it, times are tough for the Arkansas General Assembly. They're all waiting for the spotlight exposing public corruption to end, so they won't be under so much scrutiny. And during this time, what if you're a legislator and you need money? What if you're slapped with a huge expense? What if your check for consultant services is late this month? Or maybe you just need extra cash now until payday. When that happens, you can't wait. Hi, I'm Bobby Blackmail for the Arkansas Intra-Legislator Bank, your trusted source to over 135 lenders to get you short-term cash fast. Use the Arkansas Intra-Legislator Bank today, and you can have up to $12,500 cash in your checking account tomorrow. Dried-up bribes no longer coming from Medicaid entities? Handled. Extra cash until your hopeful acquittal? Done. And you'll be surprised at how easy it is to get extra cash. Just be an elected official and be comfortable with the status quo, and we'll connect you with a fellow legislator who is ready to loan. It's quick and easy. And don't worry if you can't make the payments, because the Arkansas Intra-Legislator Bank is designed to help you get through these tough economic times. There are other ways you can pay off your debt, like by voting the way the establishment wants, or by rewarding some with committee chairmanships. So forget about overdraft fees and the spirit of covetousness that sometimes overwhelms the best of lawmakers. Just remember, the Arkansas Intra-Legislator Bank for short-term cash between colleagues when you need it fast.
Some transactions have long-term consequences.
Paul Harrell, parody. Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell is building a liberty machine. Find out more at conduitnews.com.
So in the meantime of all of this going on internationally, bringing it back a little bit closer, a little more local, just in terms of national politics, we have the Democrat Party trying to tell you and the media, which is essentially, the media is the Democrat Party, the mainstream media is. They're trying to tell you that the idea that Democrats would try to steal an election is preposterous. The idea that the Broward County election official is doing something illegal is a conspiracy theory from the right. Daily Caller reporting this. They say that the media dismisses the Florida election misconduct as a conservative conspiracy theory. It's not just misconduct. This is Amber Athey writing this. It's not just misconduct. It is clear violations of Florida state election law. Republican Governor Rick Scott beat incumbent Democrat Senator Bill Nelson for the state's open Senate seat. But days after the election supervisors in Broward and Palm Beach counties were still adding votes to the tally. The supervisors refused to share where the additional ballots were coming from and how many were left to count. This would obviously, if you're any political party in the opposition on the other side, you're going to say, this doesn't look like you're being honest. But the media comes out and rebukes Republican concerns like from Governor Rick Scott himself or Ron DeSantis himself or Senator Marco Rubio. And they try to say that it's a conspiracy theory. Look at all these people. Look at these leftists. What do they say? Will Summer, Republican and internet conspiracy theories are freaking out as new ballots threaten their Florida Senate win. Politico, Trump, without evidence, accuses Democrats of election theft. That is just quite simply factually inaccurate. There is evidence of election theft and election fraud, period. Anna Navarro, man, some folks in Florida need to lay off the Cuban coffee, stop spreading conspiracy theories, and let the process play out. If we let the process play out, it'll be too late and the Democrats are going to steal this election. How many Democrats did this when Trump won? Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Can you imagine if Anna Navarro had said that after Donald Trump had won? Stop spreading conspiracy theories about Russia. Let the process play out. Vox alleged that Republicans are only upset with the process because Democrats are counting all the votes cast in the Florida Senate race. Let's see here. The Raw story. Rick Scott launches voter fraud lawsuit based on conspiracy claim that ragtime liberals are stealing Florida. Really? Is it a conspiracy claim when a court rules in favor of Governor Rick Scott? You're conveniently leaving that part of your story out, that he's already had one judge rule in his favor because these people are not following the law. But the liberal media has no shame. They have a complete agenda, and they don't want to report the facts to you accurately. This is not a conspiracy theory. This would have anybody very worried about the integrity of the election, specifically when you have this woman down there, Snipes, who has repeatedly been cited for destroying ballots when she's not supposed to. So I'll continue back with the story when we come back, and then we need to get to, by the way, there's a new story up at courtesy of Conduit for Action about some of the things that happened in the primary. That's up at Conduit News. Also, big victory for identity politics, but for self-identity politics. You know, defining your own reality. I'll tell you about that. Yeah. You know, apparently now you can, there's the argument being made that you can be whatever age you want to be. It's very ironic. I'll tell you why there's a lot of irony in this. Back in a minute.
Censured by the House, by the Senate, for basically being corrupt. And he won re-election easily last night. It just sends a message to everybody in Washington, D.C. that, hey, you can get away with this stuff.
Yeah, and it's very, very discouraging. And I noticed, when you said that corruption will always be around, and that's part of the human condition, right? And I think that's why our founding fathers, they counted on the fallibility of man, and that's why they created the Constitution to put limits on those with the power. But if corruption is something that is always going to be around, to me, that would then necessitate a limited government. It would necessitate trying to make sure that the government stays as small and confined in its role as possible. What are your thoughts?
I completely agree. The larger the government, the more opportunities there are for corruption. The more capacity the government has to make winners and losers, which is really what we're talking about. The larger the government gets, the more money that it has control over, the more it can make or destroy fortunes, right? Mm-hmm. So that's going to create more incentives for people to lobby the government to make sure that they make them rich or keep them from the poorhouse, right? I mean, this is just the danger of an expansive government. I mean, one of the most corrupt governments in the 20th century was the Soviet Union, which is a totalitarian government.
Can I get we're talking with Jay Cost, he's a conservative author, he's a historian. From a historian standpoint, last night, the midterm elections, were you surprised at all at the outcomes?
I was a little surprised. I did not expect the Republicans to do as well as they did in the Senate. From the looks of it right now, the Republicans are going to pick up a net of 3 seats, which is more than pretty much all the major race handicappers had estimated. Their losses in the House were about in line with historical projections. So I think that it wasn't a slam dunk for Democrats, which, a lot of people were expecting. I think that as midterms go, it was pretty middle of the road, which I think maybe was a surprise because I think people were sort of expecting a major rebuke to President Trump, and I don't think that we saw that last night. I mean, Florida is the quintessential swing state, and here it voted out a Democrat senator and elected another Republican governor.
Yeah,
it's hard to see that as a rebuke. So I think that it's and also I would add that we're back to divided government, which has been the norm in American history since the end of World War II. Really, most of the time since Harry Truman left office in 1952 has been spent with the two parties sharing power one way or the other.
Yeah, that is true.
Bringing you your daily dose of truth. It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
All right. 870-275-9799. Gene, Gene McVeigh, who served our country as a veteran. Happy late Veterans Day, Gene, yesterday. He writes that Macron would be speaking German if the American armed forces had not stormed the beaches of France. And that's exactly right. Macron wants to lecture President Donald Trump and lie. I mean, isn't it a lie to just say nationalism is not the same thing as patriotism? Now, there you could say that there are differences between the two because they're two different words, but they are interchangeable. He says that nationalism is treason. Really, treason? Treason? That doesn't make any sense. Well, it would make sense if you are in this little world and you believe in no borders. If you believe in no borders, then you can tell then they don't have a country. Then yeah, and it's just some globalism philosophy. Then it is treason, right? If you believe that you should you believe that you should get to have a country that's independent of what I think over here in France and what we think over here in the European Union, well, that's treasonous to us. What? These people are crazy. And he wants to say that Donald Trump's nationalism is bringing us closer to World War I? Sounds to me like it's the opposite. Once again, we have a demonstration that President Donald Trump's foreign policy goes against the status quo. He is shaking things up, and I think that is a good thing, because the way things had been going was America's sovereignty was whittling away. Other countries' sovereignty was whittling away. There's some countries that President Trump goes to, and the leaders embrace him because by him standing up for America's right to make our own decisions independent of what the global community thinks, other countries are able to do the same thing. And Donald Trump's been very clear. Hey, listen, as long as whatever you're trying to do doesn't directly go against our interests, then yeah. And this is why they're coming after him. Phone number 870-275-9799. Back to the media telling us that it's a conspiracy theory that they're trying to steal the elections down in Florida, or that there's even evidence of voter fraud here. Listen to this. Despite the media's dismissal, Republicans have already proved that election supervisors in the deep blue counties of Broward and Palm Beach are acting improperly. Scott filed 2 lawsuits on Thursday night alleging that Palm Beach County election supervisor Susan Butcher and Broward County election supervisor Brenda Snipes were breaking Florida election law. A judge ruled in favor of Scott in both cases, ordering Butcher to submit overvoted and undervoted absentee ballots for public review and ordering Snipes to hand over voter information. Neither Butcher nor Snipes had complied with the court order by the 7 p.m. deadline Friday night. So they're once again in violation of election law. These people, I really do hope somebody prosecutes them. I really, really, truly do. Meanwhile, the Miami Herald reported late Friday night that Snipes had accidentally mixed bad provisional ballots with good ones, making it nearly impossible to determine which of those votes should be counted. Yeah, just mix them all up, we'll sort it out later. We'll sort it out a couple months from now. Whatever, who cares? Make it as complicated as possible so to allow for as much corruption as possible, because we're going to make sure Bill Nelson goes back to Washington, D.C. Quote, there are at least 20 illegal votes mixed into an anonymous pile of 205 provisional ballots, all sitting in a machine that counted them but did not add them to the final count, the Herald explained. The ballots cannot be identified, Snipes confirmed. Oh, we found another box of provisional ballots in a janitor's closet down here at an elementary school. Oh, we found another box of provisional ballots in a lunchroom. Just find more and more ballots. And there are reports that they're taking these ballots like an actual blank ballot, and they're filling them out. The Federalists' Molly Hemingway broke down the other ways in which the 2 counties had failed to follow Florida law, despite 65 out of 67 of Florida counties, including the ones devastated by hurricanes, doing everything by the book. Florida law also requires that vote by mail and absentee ballots are accounted for within 30 minutes of polls closing. While the other 65 counties in Florida had no problem following this state law, the supervisors of Broward County and Palm Beach County refused to follow the state law. Florida law also requires that the Department of State be given reports every 45 minutes until results are completely filed. Palm Beach County had refused to do this. Finally, the Daily Caller News Foundation's Luke Rosiak reported Saturday that lawyers for Nelson, listen to this, and Democratic gubernatorial candidate Andrew Gillum objected to non-citizen votes being thrown out during a review of provisional ballots. The media has refused to admit the aforementioned improprieties could be an attempt to cover up fraud, or that a lack of transparency makes fraud more likely. CNN's Chris Cuomo argued as much in an interview with Republican Florida Representative Matt Gaetz. Gaetz pointed out in a response that when litigants hide evidence or potentially destroy evidence, there are adverse inferences drawn against those litigants. Radio and Hill TV host Buck Sexton pointed out the media's willful ignorance of why there are real concerns about the vote counting process. In a tweet, he said, Without evidence of election theft, sure, because the election hasn't been stolen yet. Plenty of evidence of vote tampering and fraud, which is a precursor to election theft. The media is running narrative interference until the theft is achieved. Then it's too late. Yeah, the left, very interested in voter theft. So that the part in that story to me that stood out the most, quite frankly, is the fact that we have the lawyers for Nelson and Gillum that don't want non-citizen votes in the provisional ballots to be thrown out. I mean, the Democrat Party is the party of lawlessness. They're the party of lawlessness. Their own people won't follow the laws, and then they actively advocate for illegal ballots, people who are not citizens who cast votes. I thought that wasn't supposed to be a thing, by the way. That's what we always hear from the left. Oh, Trump talking about illegals voting. Illegals don't vote. Illegal immigrants don't vote. Now they're starting to get honest. Now they say they should be able to vote. So that when they're caught voting, you know what? They should be able to vote. See how they change the narrative? Election fraud's not a problem. Yes, it is. Here's the proof. Illegals should be able to vote, though. They're citizen of the world. That's where we're headed, real quick. I want to remind you, by the way, that President Donald Trump had a National Commission on Election Fraud. They did quite a bit of research. They did quite a bit of research in states that didn't really go reported. There was a lot of information gained from that commission. A lot of people don't realize just how much information the Trump administration has on what actually goes on at our localized elections. I have a feeling that some may know that the jig is up, and they know the mountain of evidence that may be forthcoming against the Democrat Party and illegals voting in this country, and they have been for a very long time. And I get the feeling that's why you're starting to see people say, well, illegals should have the right to vote. You've seen it out in California like crazy. California will be the biggest culprit in all of this, if my gut tells me anything, or if my gut is correct. Telephone number 870-275-9799. That's 870-275-9799. All right, so this next story, is so funny to me. I can't believe this. Let's start with this Tucson, Arizona. Okay. This is just a news outlet. It's a local outlet out of Tucson, but you can find multiple stories about this all over the internet. Right. So there's a Dutchman. There's a guy from the Netherlands, and he's 69 years old, but he wants to change his age to 49 years old because age is just a number. What's in a number? Now, what's his motivation behind this? Well, as you read this article here, the guy's name is Emil Rattleband or Rateband. He thinks age is just a number, and his number, and in his is a number the Dutchman wants changed. Apparently, he's a TV personality. He's asked the court in the Netherlands to approve his request for a new birthday that officially would make him 49. Rattleband says his legal appeal is consistent with other forms of personal transformation that are gaining acceptance and government recognition in the Netherlands, meaning just self-identity, being able to define your reality as you see it, independent of other factors like actual biological age, actual biological sex, that sort of thing. Quote, with this freedom of choice of name, freeness of gender, I want to have my own age. I want to control myself, he said Thursday. Rattleband says I don't know if that's how you pronounce it. Radelban sounds like a wizard in Harry Potter. Radelban says he wants to avoid age discrimination in society, especially on dating websites. This is where it gets funny. He says, so when I ask for a mortgage, for example, they say it's impossible. If I go on Tinder, then I get women from 68 to 69 when women are there. How about just being economical with the truth of his age? I don't want to lie, he said. I want to be myself, so don't force me to lie. It's quite clear that elderly people have a much smaller chance of getting a job than younger people. This is what somebody is saying on this. Some lady who specializes in human rights. It's the human right of a 69-year-old man to get to call himself 49. Look at that picture. Look at that hair. He's got the gray facial hair, but he's still got some dark on top. What is that, hair dye? That man is not 49 years old. He's just not 49 years old. In rare cases, even race has also become more fluid. Yeah, we've had people that they want to self-identify as black when they're white, you know. So here, go to this other article. If identity politics win, a man of 69 can be 49. When self-identification trumps biology, men can be women, white can be black, and age really will be just a number. This is Janice Turner. It's over at the Times. It's a across the pond website, as I say. So check this out for a second. You know why this is so ironic? I think this will be where people just put an end to it. You've got this guy who's 69 years old. He wants to be identified as a 49-year-old just so he can go on his Tinder app and he can, be a little bit more successful. You know what I'm saying? With the younger ladies. So you got a 69-year-old man who wants to be with 49-year-old women, or maybe, I don't know, maybe. Let's see, if he's 49 years old, there might be, a 35-year-old there. It's like, okay, but a 35-year-old woman's not going to be 69 years old. You're thinking, no. But see, the doctors tell this man, if you read other publications, the doctors tell this man, according to him, he's got the body of a 49-year-old. He's 69 years old, but he's got the body. He's in the shape of a 49-year-old. So he thinks he should be able to identify as 49 years old. Leave it to a red-blooded man, ladies and gentlemen. You know how ironic this is? This is so ironic. To blow up the whole self-identity scam. Leave it to a red-blooded man who's only after one thing, the one thing that men typically are after, which is the definition of irony, to essentially blow up the LGBT RSTLNE, would you like to buy Val community's whole endeavor to be able to define their own reality outside of actual objective facts. Yeah, there'll be another A soon. A will stand for H. That's very good, Joe. This is one of those stories that actually I just think is hilarious. This guy wants to self-identify. Call him. I guess it's very. It's a definition or a example of ingenuity to say, hey, how can I take this new self-identity thing and figure out a way to use it so I can be with more women. Oh, I've got it. I'd get a lot more action if they would let me say 49 on the Tinder app instead of 69. Now, here's my question. Why can't he just make a fake account? Do they have laws over that over there? Why can't he just catfish somebody? Maybe he could convince them. Yeah, I'm 49 years old. You'd be living a lie, man. Even if the government grants you a new birthday, you're still going to be living a lie. The phone number is 870-275-9799. State Representative Brant Smith just walked in the studio. We're going to be talking to him in 15 minutes at 7:05. So stay tuned for that. And then State Representative Stephen Meeks will be calling in this morning at 7:33. We'll be talking to him about appropriations and things like that. So don't go anywhere. We got a great show for you. This is Conduit News Radio. I'll be back in a moment.
Russellville-based firearms manufacturer Omega are making clones of the most notable German firearms in the world. These delayed rotor-lock firearms have been and are currently used by law enforcement and military worldwide. At Omega, they manufacture their guns right here in Arkansas and produce the best reproduction in the marketplace that comes with a complete 5-year warranty. At Omega, they take firearm manufacturing seriously and offer discounts to active and retired law enforcement. Whether you're using Omega firearms to defend the public, defend your family, or for target practice, Omega has your back. For pricing, go to omega-guns.com. That's omega-guns.com. If you're like me, you believe that small business is the heart of Arkansas's economic engine, and it should be viewed that way by the politicians in Little Rock. Conduit for Commerce also believes, like you and I believe, policies that achieve less regulation and lower taxation help small business in Arkansas thrive. Other policies like small, constitutionally consistent government and reducing citizen dependency on government keeps it from growing and expanding its influence on our daily lives. Conduit for Commerce works every day to educate the general public and legislators on these important priorities in the name of Arkansas small business. By the way, contributions to Conduit for Commerce are tax deductible. Log on now to conduitforcommerce.org and click on Contact Us on the right side of the page. That's conduitforcommerce.org. Go there now and learn the facts on protecting small business in Arkansas.
And I agree with what you're saying about the not having some sort of mandate here where President Trump or what the Republicans have been doing has been rejected. I mean, I think there's a lot of people out there, Republican voters, they turned out just because of the results. You have the Supreme Court, for example. I mean, I think the Brett Kavanaugh hearings really motivated the right. That seems to be kind of the consensus. Would you agree with that?
I would. I think that probably gave a spur to, especially in the redder states, Missouri, North Dakota, Indiana, Montana, which the Democrats nearly lost and was really a sleeper race. I think that Republicans are probably kicking themselves for not investing more in Montana. But all of those states had Democrat senators who voted against Kavanaugh. And all of them lost or very narrowly lost in Florida, too. But West Virginia, which is now one of the most pro-Trump, actually, I would say West Virginia.
Determined to drain the swamp in Little Rock, it's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
All right, here we go. Self-identity. Folks, there is a great story up at Conduit for Action. There's some fallout. There's been some allegations made about, why maybe one Republican or some Republicans lost up in areas of northwest Arkansas maybe they shouldn't have lost in. That'd be Charlie. Yeah, Charlie Cons would be one of them. Conduit for Action writes, State Representative Johnny Rye of Truman posted a thank you to voters for re-electing him to the House of Representatives. Thank you. It's a winner. How about this? We won the election with 76% winning finish. The statistics will formally come in a later date. The non-official tally was 5,600 to 1,500. We won basically by staying with conservative values and having great and loyal friends. Once again, thank you for your effort in voting and encouraging us throughout the campaign. Back to this commentary. Republican winning by staying with conservative values. We see too many politicians who campaign on conservative values but hop on the progressive side once they get elected. Representative Rye's claim of staying with conservative values is not an empty brag. Conduit for Commerce examined big issues in the state legislature in 2017, and Representative Rye ranked in the top third of the House of Representatives for conservative votes on economic freedom issues. Representative Charlie Collins of Fayetteville was defeated for re-election. He had a hard row to hoe, despite being well-funded. Fayetteville is a large college town, and a significant portion of the voters have remained liberal. Collins sided with the liberals on many issues during his service, including in 2012 when he was one of only a handful of Republicans to join Democrats in electing Rhino Davy Carter as Speaker of the House in a deal that gave the Democrats significant power. Analysis of 2017 voting records on conservative economic issues by Conduit for Commerce showed Representative Collins' voting record was in the bottom half of the House of Representatives. That includes both the Republicans and Democrats. Placating the liberals did not help. Leaving your Republican base to cozy up with liberals does not work when the Democrats have a candidate. The liberals will vote for the Democrat, and conservatives will not be excited about a lukewarm candidate. The tactic of talking conservative and voting to the left is often the norm in the state legislature. State Senate President Pro Temp designee Jim Hendren, a Republican, of Gravette, tried to explain away why he shifted to the left beginning in 2015, saying, "Now, when we were Republicans, we were in the minority party for a long time. It didn't matter what we filed of any significant change because it wasn't going to pass." He went on, "It's a different situation down here today, and we have an opportunity to make real change and pass legislation and do things. We also have an opportunity," he said, "to screw it completely up." So, you can talk big about conservative values, but when you are in power, those values need to be replaced by progressive pragmatism. Doesn't sound like a formula to fire up the base, even if your uncle is the governor. President Donald Trump touched on a similar theme, noting that many of the Republican members of Congress who lost to Democrats were not supportive of his agenda. Again, the left is going to vote for a liberal Democrat, no matter how much you pander to them. People like Jim Hendren think Conduit for Action is to blame because we don't let him keep voters in the dark. We print voting records. You deserve to know. We'll be printing voting records after the 2019 legislative session. And there's a link right here at this article to the 2017 legislative session voting records. Congratulations to Representative Johnny Rye Truman for winning re-election and for doing it with a record of voting for conservative values. So, isn't that an interesting take on, I guess, test this theory, play this theory out in your head here. I do think it is generally true that when, and you see this in the media, right? For example, you saw it with the late John McCain. Before John McCain ran for president, he would go on MSNBC, and he was promoted by the leftists. He was promoted by the liberal media. The second he announced for president, though, they attacked and demonized him because the left's going to support and vote for Democrats if there's a Democrat to vote for. So placating the left from, while you are on the right, placating the left is never going to get you favor from the left. They're never going to come and say, oh, okay, Republicanism is the way to go, right? That's not going to happen. They're always going to vote for the leftist. And so when you run as a Republican and you run based on these principles and then you slowly kind of depart from them, you're not going to have the base. You're going to have your base fired up. That's the theorem here. That's the hypothesis. And I think if you test it out, most of the time it's going to be true, and it's going to give you the results that we have most of the time. So check that article out up at Conduit News, and we're going to be back here in just a moment with State Representative Brant Smith, and yesterday was Veterans Day, but today is when Veterans Day is observed, is what it says on the calendar. Tell me what you think. We had a great first hour recapping everything that happened internationally with President Trump and French President Macron, as well as what's going on in Florida in the re-election count. And we didn't touch on Arizona. They're counting votes there as well, and the Democrat now has a lead, and it's slightly growing and doesn't look good right now for Republicans in Arizona. But we'll look into that as well. Folks, don't go anywhere. One more hour coming your way next.
Northeast Arkansas. This is News Talk 101.3 FM and 12:30 AM KBTM, Jonesboro, an EAB radio station.
Incentives for people to lobby the government to make sure that they make them rich or keep them from the poorhouse, right? I mean, this is just the danger of an expansive government. I mean, one of the most corrupt governments in the 20th century was the Soviet Union, which is a totalitarian government.
Can I get we're talking with Jay Cost, who's a conservative author. He's a historian. From a historian standpoint, last night, the midterm elections, were you surprised at all at the outcomes?
I was a little surprised. I did not expect the Republicans to do as well as they did in the Senate. From the looks of it right now, the Republicans are going to pick up a net of 3 seats, which is more than pretty much all the major race handicappers had estimated. Their losses in the House were about in line with historical projections. So I think that it wasn't a slam dunk for Democrats, which, a lot of people were expecting. I think that as midterms go, it was pretty middle of the road, which I think maybe was a surprise because I think people were sort of expecting a major rebuke to President Trump, and I don't think that we saw that last night. I mean, Florida is the quintessential swing state, and here it voted out a Democrat senator and elected another Republican governor.
Yeah,
it's hard to see that as a rebuke, So I think that it's and also I would add that we're back to divided government, which has been the norm in American history since the end of World War II. Really, most of the time since Harry Truman left office in 1952 has been spent with the two parties sharing power one way or the other.
Yeah, that is true, and I agree with what you're saying about the not having some sort of mandate here, where President Trump or what the Republicans have been doing has been rejected. I mean, I think there's a lot of people out there, Republican voters, they turned out just because of the results. You have the Supreme Court, for example. I mean, I think the Brett Kavanaugh hearings really motivated the right. That seems to be kind of the consensus. Would you agree with that?
I would. I think that probably gave a spur to, especially in the redder states, Missouri, North Dakota, Indiana, Montana, which the Democrats nearly lost and was really a sleeper race. I think that Republicans are probably kicking themselves for not investing more in Montana. But all of those states had Democrat senators who voted against Kavanaugh. And all of them lost or very narrowly lost, in Florida too. But West Virginia, which is now one of the most pro-Trump, actually I would say West Virginia is the most pro-Trump state in the country, reelected their Democratic senator, Joe Manchin, who also, not coincidentally I think, was the only Democrat to vote for Kavanaugh. So it's pretty strong evidence, circumstantial, but it's pretty strong evidence that made a difference last night.
So last week we have a whiteboard in the studio, and I put some slogan on it once a week. And last week it was just "If you can keep it," and it was obviously referencing what you've written about Benjamin Franklin's response to the question. What did you give us? And a republic, ma'am, if you can keep it. Back to the book that I really, really enjoy about corruption. And by the way, A Republic No More, I especially love the fact of the illustration on the front. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but this illustration, wasn't this like a piece of campaign rhetoric when we were trying to abolish the state legislature from electing senators and instead move to the popular vote?
Yeah, that's actually, it's from Puck Magazine in 1905, and it's sort of a criticism of the machine style of politics that had really become very pronounced in the North. And so
as I look at this, Jay, I just think to myself, I mean, it really, if you didn't know the era it was from, it would still fit in right now. It fits in perfectly.
Yeah, I agree. That's why I picked it as my. I was looking around at, when I was getting the book ready, and I was looking around for uncopyrighted historical photographs. I couldn't believe my good fortune for finding something that fits the thesis of the book so perfectly.
That's great. Right here, just in the fold, this book argues we couldn't, meaning we couldn't keep the republic. Just talk briefly a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, I think ultimately the problem is that we have a government that was designed to exercise limited powers. And that was the design of it.
think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the Founding Fathers.
They seem to be in full-scale retreat from spending cuts and are talking about raising people's taxes again. And I have only one thing to say to the tax increasers. Go ahead, make my day.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. Those who would trade our freedom for security have embarked on this downward course. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell is on now.
All right, folks, welcome to the program. Thanks so much for being with us today. I got this button here that just keeps messing up on my microphone. The intersection of conservative ideas and reality. We're building a liberty machine. Thank you so much for being with us. Happy Monday. I want you to welcome back to the program. In studio, we got State Representative Brant Smith is with us.
Thank you, Paul. Pleasure to be here.
It's always good to have you, sir, and really appreciate it. So I want to have you in. I want to talk just a little bit about, well, a couple of things. Let's start nationally and kind of work our way down. First of all, it is the observance of Veterans Day today.
Correct.
It was yesterday, but what are your thoughts on veterans?
Well, I have a debt of gratitude to pay to all of our veterans. And, Craighead County has hundreds, if not thousands, of veterans from multiple generations and wars. And if I hadn't been in Iraq for so long, embedded with these soldiers, men and women in uniform, I don't think I would have quite the insight into why I should value them and appreciate them, but I do. And I actually, anyone that's ever served is going to know what these little green notebooks are, and it's because it's how you document everything you do in the field, on missions, whether it's on a FOB or a COS or some air base. And I think about those that I served with who were with the 3rd ACR out of Fort Hood, then the battalion out of Fort Bliss, and Colonel Michael R. Eastman. Just living with these men and women day in, day out, rolling outside the wire, being involved, getting a seat on their missions, and then having dedicated missions to the purpose that I filled out there, showed me that we have the best trained, the most restrained military in the world. I know things go bad sometimes, but I've never seen more commitment and dedication to mission and to serving the American people, even in a combat environment, than I did. I had a front row seat, so it made me very proud, and it didn't matter what time I was supposed to be up and out the door in the morning, I was there, and those friendships will last me a lifetime.
Yeah.
And so I love these guys and gals, and we owe them a debt of gratitude.
Oh, there's no question. The amount of courage that it reminds me of the amount of courage that I just don't simply possess,
Right.
That they have. I was talking through a friend to they know a veteran who goes to the VA hospital over in Memphis. They went there the other day, and normally they go, and it's been awful. They went there, and there was valet parking.
Yes.
They go in now, and everybody's friendly, and they smiling. Hey, how are you today? How's the weather treating you? There's this, everything was clean.
Right.
Everything was cleaned up. There was this picture, a nice portrait of the president there. And they said, Paul, it was night and day.
Yes. Well, and along that line, I think it is a reflection on the leadership we have in the White House right now. The values that the president has are just transferred down the chain to even those frontline VA workers. And recently, one of our House members lost her husband, who was a colonel in the Air Force. And when he passed away, I was there within just a few minutes. Our committee ended, and I beat it over to the VA there in Little Rock, and they have a special ceremony to recognize these men and women who served, and it's amazing, the respect, even after life leaves the body. And so I was able to accompany that ceremony and that procession from the room where this gentleman had passed away, this service member, all the way down the halls, and they ring 5 bells, and then the chaplain is there with the family, and they go down to the lower floor to the morgue. But there's so much respect, and there's volunteers that actually participate in that ceremony. And so when this man, his first name was Larry, but when he passed away, it kicks into motion a whole different kind of respect for that service member. Even as they exit life, there's respect. And I don't know how long that's been going on, but it was just something for me to be a support for the family, the Brown family, and just to show my not only respect but love for this family. We don't take into consideration what it costs family members. I've got a nephew that flew several tours of duty over Afghanistan. He's a major now, and I know what the cost it took on his family's, my niece's family, with him gone. I also think about Gayla. If it hadn't been for Skype, it would have been a tough 2 deployments for me, and they were extended deployments. So I wasn't on a 9-month or 12-month rotation. I was there as the continuity between outgoing and incoming brigades. And so she put up with me being gone a lot. And this year we celebrate 38 years, but someone asked me, what's the secret to your marriage, And I said, well, I was gone about 17 of those years. So I think,
time apart.
Well, but the family members of these service members, they are so supportive. And occasionally you hear about some things where marriages don't last, and that's a tragedy. But if America ever ceases to appreciate the military and what they do and their sacrifices, we're doomed.
So we're talking with State Representative Brant Smith on this Veterans Day, or the day we observe it. Want to know, we're talking just nationally a little bit first. Country's pretty divided right now. We do have this military is being rebuilt. The economy's doing well.
Yeah, it's booming.
We have consumer confidence at an all-time high. We've got record low unemployment. We've got black unemployment at record lows. We've got Hispanic. We've got the approval ratings for these groups that the left always loves to talk about. They're approving of the president's job more and more and more. And yet, we seem, if you listen to the media, that we're more divided now than ever.
Well, because that's their script. They can't support the president. If Donald Trump walked on water, the headlines would read, "Our president can't swim." Mm-hmm. And so there is a concerted effort to belittle, besmirch him, to attack him at every turn. And Kellyanne Conway and Sarah Huckabee Sanders, these folks are going out and telling us what's really going on, what the president is really like. And they've been personally attacked and maligned as well. And it's just the country, according to the media, is divided. We're fractured. But when you look at how people voted, there may be pockets of division. But overall, the American people are smart enough to recognize this is a good president. These are good things that are happening. And finally, we're getting some traction where we had lost traction under the previous administration.
You think this Antifa group should be classified as a terrorist organization?
Absolutely. Absolutely. As a matter of fact, I just mentioned to you that Nation of Islam has set up a training center down in Little Rock. Really near the Camp Robinson area. And when I drove by there the other day, I thought, well, are they ratcheting up for the general session, so they can show up and protest? And I mean, I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. But during some of the protests, being a smart aleck as I am, I walked up to one of the protesters and I said, exactly what do I have to do to get a job like you? And boy, that didn't go over very well. But, people don't even read the bills. They don't read what's going on, and they just get a text message, show up here and protest. We'll have signs for you. Mm-hmm. And when I asked these people, did you read the bills that you're protesting? Well, no, but our leadership told us to show up. And I think, what's wrong with people that they don't do their own research, that they don't read for themselves what's really going on?
Yeah.
And that's a shame, too, because we're supposed to be the most educated country in the world, and yet we've forgotten how to read and do our own thinking.
So you mentioned the General Assembly, the session. So that's coming up in January. Now, the last session 2 years ago, you ran a bill to try to end sanctuary campuses, meaning college campuses here in Arkansas. And that didn't go anywhere. I guess that's what failed in the committee. But I just, when I was preparing for this interview, Brand, I was thinking to myself, well, immigration was a big deal back then, illegal immigration. So much. You were really ahead of the curve. It's a huge deal now with the caravan. It's on the forefront. The president has made it a big part of his campaign,
right.
To try to help these other people. So, I mean, are there any plans coming up in January to try to readdress this potential problem?
Well, and I spoke with Senator Gary Stubblefield about he had a bill, I had a bill. He pulled his bill, and according to our conversation, he regrets pulling his bill down. It dealt more with cities.
Instead of just yours was just
campuses. Mine was more focused on the campuses across Arkansas. But as we have communicated and gotten face-to-face, we have decided it would be good for us to run that again. His bill maybe strengthen it in some areas, and we know it will stir people up. But we're going to do it, and we may run it from both sides, a mirror bill, so that we can streamline it and push it through quicker. But Arkansas doesn't need to become a magnet for illegal immigrants. And I don't have any personal grudge against immigration. I've helped many immigrants from Iraq get here because I know their love for our country, their service to our country, where they embedded with our military. And so I think I've got about 4 Iraqi families here in the United States. Some are Christians and some are not. But they love this country as much, if not more, than I do. And that's saying a lot. And the process was very rigorous. But Gary and I both feel, Senator Stubblefield and I both believe that if we don't do something to get out in front of what the potentials are for sanctuary status here in Arkansas, we could become a magnet state. And we're already a magnet state for healthcare fraud and people coming in to take advantage of our healthcare system. We don't need that to take place with illegals. Mm-hmm. And so we're going to do that. We're going to do what's right for the state of Arkansas.
At what point, you mentioned the personal compassion. I mean, that we have, from a human standpoint. And it's, but it's as if the left want, they would call us hypocrites.
Yeah, that's fine.
When we say, but, at the same time, we have people that are already here.
Right.
And we have borders and we have a country. I mean, the left is now trying to say that if you believe in borders and immigration done legally, then you are a fascist or somehow you don't like compassion for human beings. And yet borders and having a country and having some sort of system by where people can immigrate, in some cases they can't. Some countries shut down their borders. That's been a concept of governments since man has been man.
Right. Well, people that live in bad situations are always going to try to shift demographically, regionally to an area where they've got better opportunity, more freedom to express themselves, perhaps religious freedoms. But when people say, I lack compassion, I brought these as examples. I wrote that book when I first came back from Iraq.
Between two rivers. So is
Yes.
that those two rivers would be what, the Euphrates?
Euphrates and the Tigris.
Yeah.
And the thing is, Paul, this book talks about stories of personal experience when I was there as director of an NGO. And there are prayer pointers in here. I have a great deal of compassion for these folks that are displaced. Worked with the UNHCR on internally displaced people and tried to help them and make sure they had food and warm clothes and a shelter. And you talk about burning the candle at both ends. That's what we did for the first 2 years. And then this book, Iraq Cradle of Errors, where I actually went out while I was with the Army and asked questions that really zeroed in on what do people really want. A lot of the Iraqis told me, nobody's ever asked us what we want. You're the first. And so I think we've got to do a lot more in the way of immigration reform, and that takes place at the federal level. It seems like the Democrats wanted it at one time, and then the Republicans came up with a great plan, and now they're opposed to it. So, I mean, it's like...
They also don't want merit-based immigration.
Right. So how long will they be obstructing legitimate reforms to our immigration system? And this chain migration, as well as the birther situation, you know, with your
anchor babies.
Anchor babies, yeah. When Gayla and I lived overseas, we knew a lot of people, and they're good people. They just took advantage of our laws. They'd vacation to the States or come here for a few months, have a baby, get that passport, go back to their home country.
Mm-hmm.
And even back in the early 90s, that just rubbed me wrong. We had a child born overseas, and there was no option to have dual citizenship. It's like kind of like these tariffs, you know, it's all one-sided. You want what you want, and we'd like to have a level playing field, even with the citizenship issues. And so I think Trump is on the right track, and while he's misunderstood, this is good for America.
Yeah. Well, State Representative Brant Smith, it's always great to have you in to talk to us, and I'd love to do it again soon sometime.
Well, let me just conclude, if you don't mind, if we've got time.
Go for it. We got time.
I went over and campaigned for Craig Christensen in Newport, that district that was held up until recently by Michael John Gray.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
I knocked doors. I've visited with people, and most of the doors where I went, the people inside said, I don't even know who Michael John Gray is. His claim to fame was at the state level with the Democratic Party. Mm-hmm. But his own constituents didn't really know who he was. Only one family said, hey, we're going to stay with Michael John Gray. Everybody else, when I'd go up and talk about Craig, you know, to them, they would say, well, is he a Republican or a Democrat? And I said, he's a Republican. They said, save your speech, we're voting for him, or no, we already voted for him. And so I felt good about that race. And then the Johnny Rye race over in his district, the people over there loved him so much. But his opposition felt like, and I was there on Election Day, that the way to win a race is to intimidate through violence. And they threatened. They wanted the fist fight right out there where we were standing holding signs. And I just thought, we do not need that type of representative down at the House. Wow. And so the way things worked out, we've unseated a Democrat in...
Yeah, not only just a Democrat, the head of the Democrat Party of Arkansas.
Well, and I spoke with some people about that, and they said, well, we've tried to reach out to Representative Gray, and he's not returning calls, and he's not returning text messages. So, you know, I'm compassionate in the sense that I hope you're not slipping into clinical depression, but this is the way our system works. The Republicans prevailed this time, and we had better do what we say we'll do, or we deserve to be beaten in the next election cycle.
State Representative Brant Smith, I
Yes,
agree
sir.
with you, sir. Thank you so much for coming on.
You bet, Paul.
All right, folks, we're going to take a break. Going to be back in just a moment.
Think about the structure of the Senate, the structure of the House, the presidency, right? It was designed to handle certain enumerated powers, right? But now we have a government that, in effect, can do anything that it wants. but it wasn't designed to do that. It wasn't designed to handle unlimited power. And the argument of my book is that the structure of our government does not fit. It's not a good fit for the powers it wields. I mean, it's almost like, imagine building, like if you're going to build a house, you're going to dig a foundation for your house, for a 2-story house. But you wouldn't add, 10 more stories on a building that his house is only built for 2 stories, the foundation is. Sort of the same thing with our government. Our government was originally designed to handle a small amount of power. We just kept adding power upon power upon power to it, and it doesn't handle it responsibly. And so we don't have republic, right, which, as Lincoln said, is the government that's supposed to be of the people, by the people, for the people. We have something that's...
Who's next to Zipline?
Me, and I'm really excited about this.
Sir, I'm sorry. The Zipline has a 350-pound weight limit, and frankly, I do not think it would be safe for you.
Oh, that's okay. I self-identify as 180 pounds, so it's cool.
Sir, that doesn't make any sense to me, and I'm afraid we can't let you ride the Zipline. You're too heavy. I'm sorry.
I can't believe this. I thought we had evolved as a society. I thought this was America, but I guess this is just my plight. First slavery, and now fat-shaming.
Sir, again, I'm really sorry.
You listen to me. If you don't let me ride, not only will I sue this company for discrimination, I will sue you for damages because right now my feelings are so hurt and I feel embarrassed because I'm holding up the line.
Wouldn't be the first time.
Watch it, mister.
Look, okay, I'm sorry. I just don't think it would be safe for you.
You don't understand. I self-identify as skinny. So you have to let me ride the zip line. The Constitution says so. I get to define my own reality.
Oh, okay, fine, whatever. Ride the zip line. Mike, let this man ride the zip line.
Thank you. Now watch as my self-identity trumps your bigotry. See you on the other side, racist. Here I go! Doctor, thank goodness. What's the prognosis?
Sir, we've done everything we can, and you only have seconds to live.
No, you cannot say that. I do not self-identify as a dead person.
PHP Parody. Exposing the truth and everything the Marble Palace establishment keep trying to cover up. It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
All right, folks, welcome back to the program. Thank you so much for being with us. The telephone number, 870-275-9799. You know that last parody, the self-identity parody? No, I don't self-identify as a dead person. There's a guy that who's 69 years old. We talked about this last hour. He's 69 years old, and he wants to self-identify as a 49-year-old man so he can get more dates, on his Tinder app. The doctors say he's got the body of a 49-year-old. And so that's the thing. Isn't that ironic? And I think society is going to say enough. I think with this, you know why? You know why society will say enough? Because this guy is a man who's trying to be with more women by taking advantage of the self-identity. And so that's why I think this is a great story. It's so ironic because the left was like, oh, no, you're not respecting women. And it really, at the same time, it obviously exposes the ridiculousness of this whole situation where you can define your own reality and that there aren't objective facts. There's not biological truths or truths about your age. You were born on this date, sir. This is how old you are, right? The earth revolves around the sun. This is how we track how old you are. No. I'm only 49. Back in a minute.
Closer to what in the book I call an interest group democracy, where it's really a matter of groups grasping for whatever spoils they can get from the government.
Let me ask you this, is kind of our last question here. Do you think you mentioned earlier that you don't really see any huge movements when it comes to draining the swamp? Do you think that's because maybe some of the substance that President Trump is attempting to do isn't happening, or do you think the system resists it because of his style? Potentially, that you hear a lot of people say, well, really like what's happening, but yeah, sometimes I don't always agree with the approach or that sort of thing. What are your thoughts about what's going on right now?
I think that the real problem is, frankly, President Trump's "drain the swamp" is a great line, but where's policy that he's put behind it? And when did he put forward some genuine reform effort to clean out the influence of interest groups? What's the legislation? I didn't see anything like that, and he didn't stake it. Presidents, when they get elected, they can only really get a couple things done. So this is what I'm doing. I'm going all in on this, right? George Bush did tax cuts, and Obama did Obamacare. Trump decided to do tax cuts. He didn't push all in on, let's drain the swamp. And I think that that's really kind of been the problem, which is, and frankly, a lot of presidents do the same thing. They campaign against Washington, but then they get there, and then what policies are they proposing that are going to fix Washington? What's the legislation that he's introduced in Congress? I haven't seen anything. I think that's the real problem, to be honest. His rhetorical style is what it is. It's worked for him. It was a problem for House Republicans last night, but not for Senate Republicans.
True.
But I'm just trying to think, where has he actually said, okay, here is my Drain the Swamp Act of 2018? What was it? I haven't seen anything.
So what's the hatred? Where's the hatred coming from then? What is he doing to provoke the hatred?
Well, look, I think Trump is making manifest certain cultural divisions that exist in our subtext and our cultural subtext. And I think bottom line, when you get right down to it, the people who hate Trump look at him and think this is not the type of guy who should be in charge. The type of guy who should be in charge is one of our guys. I think it's really as simple as that when you get right down to it. That a guy like Trump is just not the type of guy who's supposed to be in charge of the country. It's supposed to be a guy like Obama or a guy like Romney or a guy like Bush, right? That he's the wrong type. Almost.
The intersection of conservative ideas and reality. Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
All right, 870-275-9799. The telephone number, call or text. Go to facebook.com/Conduit News to sound off, or the YouTube channel, Conduit News. Subscribe. Click the little bell to receive notifications. Also, look at the news stories up at conduitnews.com right now, where you can also watch the show while you're clicking on stories, reading on those stories. Folks, welcome to the program. We've got State Representative Stephen Meeks is calling in from Faulkner County. That's district there, 67 he represents. Representative Meeks, thanks for joining us this morning.
Yes, good morning. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Hey, first off, Stephen, I want to talk about the Faulkner County Tea Party luncheon, where I was there last week. You were there as well, and I referenced the fact that you are always the guy who motions for adjournment, and now that has to do with seniority, right?
Right, yeah. Based upon tradition, the senior member of the House always does the adjourn motion.
Okay, so you're the senior member. You always do the adjournment, and so that actually means that you hold a record. Is that correct?
Yes, because that's the motion that gets passed every day, and so I make, as you said, I make that motion, and so I hold the record for basically every General Assembly for being the representative who gets the most motions passed.
Well, there you go. I mean,
Yep.
and that's
it's an easy one, of course. But, yep.
I know, but hey, that is, if
someone's got to do it.
If you wanted to be deceptive, you could put that on mailers, and people would be like, "Oh, wow, he gets things done." Anyway, I thought that was an interesting piece of trivia.
Yeah.
Anyway, but I wanted to talk a little bit about back a couple months ago, or more than a couple at this point. There was the appropriations process. You had the Joint Budget Committee's meeting. And, well, just go ahead and tell us what – there was a problem, right? People were asking for way more money than they spent, right?
Right. So just a little bit of background for folks that are not familiar with the process. The appropriation process, what that does is that sets spending limits for state agencies and tells them, what's the maximum amount of money they can spend in each category. And those categories are generally salaries, operations, conference and travel, capital improvements, things like that. And a lot of times what we were finding was that the amount of money that they spent was way less than the appropriation authority they were asking. So, for example, they may have spent, say, $1 million, just to keep the number simple. They may have spent $1 million on their operating expenses, but they were asking for $3 million worth of spending authority. And there is some justification sometimes for allowing some large caps like that. For example, the road department or the forestry department. This last summer, it was a relatively quiet summer. We didn't have a lot of wildfires in the state, and so their expenses were low. Next summer, that may not be the case, and there may be more wildfires, and so their expenses are high. And so we want to leave them a little bit of headroom there so that they don't have to come back to us and for nickel and dime stuff, so to speak, for them to be able to carry out what their mission is. But we found in a lot of cases that wasn't the case, that the appropriation spending authority levels were way more than what they were actually spending. Now, some people will argue that, the appropriation is not real money. The real money comes later in the Revenue Stabilization Act. But what the appropriation does, though, it allows the General Assembly to maintain control of spending levels. And so myself, Representative Dotson, and several of the other conservative members started saying, no, we need to get these appropriations more in line with what your actual spending is. And if something does come along, a federal grant or whatnot, you can always come back to us and ask for approval. And that way it helps to keep the people's elected representatives in the loop of what's going on. And so we made a motion last time, and we got it passed, that said that if they wanted to spend greater than 10%, or they wanted spending authority more than 10% of what they had actually spent, that they had to start justifying that to us. During the fiscal session, we were, with some limited success, some of the conservatives, we were able to rein some of that stuff back in, but it always felt like the other members were asking permission from the agency. Hey, is it okay if we do this? Hey, it's okay if we do this. And I'm thinking, we're the representatives. We don't need to be asking them for permission. We need to just do it and put it back in line. So we were able to get this 10% justification passed. And since we did that, the agencies are putting their appropriation request much better in line with what their actual spending is. And there's been a couple agencies that have come in where Representative Dotson, who's actually chairing the committee now, has told agencies, for example, the Heritage Department came to us a couple weeks ago with theirs, and Representative Dotson, because of a lot of questions from the members and because of this initiative, he told them basically they needed to roll their sleeves up, sharpen their pencils, and go back and come back with a appropriation request that was better in line with what their actual spending was. And, they came back about a week and a half later, and they knocked $5 million off their appropriation request.
Wow, 1.5 million or 5 million?
1.5 million.
Okay. So that sounds pretty. I mean, it sounds to me like, first of all, what were they asking? Do you remember how much more they were asking for than what they had spent?
They were asking. Well, it was at $1.5 million is the authority that they were asking for. The original number I don't remember, but it's over. I think it's like over $100 million budget, because they've got the Department of Heritage has several sub departments, and so all those appropriations, they add up. But anyways, some of the departments of higher ed, some of the community colleges, some of those were reining. We came back in tens of millions of dollars. And so overall, we're not through with the budget process yet. We've got this week and next week, and we've already got them dropped. $2.8 billion is how much appropriation authority we've reined in just the last couple of weeks.
We're talking with State Representative Stephen Meeks. It seems like this is certainly a move in the right direction, Stephen, because if it's capped at 10%, and they do have an opportunity to get more from a grant or something like that, they don't just get it; they have to now come back before you. So it's like, well, we're asking once. And you know what? We're going to have to ask twice, which actually is you guys exercising more authority and being a check on these executive agencies. But
right.
Here's a question though that and this may I may not this may not be in line with what you're thinking, but why don't departments roll over any extra money that they would get and just not request more? You know what I mean? Can you address that? This is just me talking from somebody who has to budget my own household,
Sure. There's actually two different, those almost apples and oranges, because we do allow some agencies to roll over what's called a carryover fund, and it depends on the mission of the agency whether they're allowed to do that. A lot of them, any excess revenue they have either comes back to the Treasury or just stays in the Treasury, and it doesn't go out to them. But when they roll it over, then that rollover itself then also becomes subject to the appropriation. So, for example, let's say it's an agency that has a $100 million a year budget, and at the end of the year they've got $10 million left over. So what ends up happening is they roll that $10 million over, and then now from the Treasury, they may only need $90 million to complete their mission that year. So it ends up saving the taxpayers money.
Right.
But that still falls under the appropriation level. So if we cap the appropriation at $110 million, that doesn't mean that that $10 million they've rolled over, they suddenly go out on a spending spree and spend more than what the appropriation authority allows. They're still capped at that appropriation authority. So that prevents them from going out and, hey, we've got an extra $10 million, so we're going to blow it on whatever. It still has to fall in that. And one of the things I'm also noticing is there's been a change in the mindset. I heard one of the directors talk about we're trying to rein in our mission creep, and those are things we didn't, when I was first elected and we were under Democrat state control, those are things I never heard.
So define mission creep. Define mission creep for the audience.
Mission creep, what that is a state agency is tasked to do a certain mission, but over time they develop programs that start getting into other areas, and before long, the tasks that they're doing are well beyond the scope of what they originally were set up. And so some of the directors are trying to rein that back in and say, no, that's not an area that we're supposed to be in. Either it belongs to other agency or it's not something that we should be involved in. And so they're reining it back in, trying to focus on what the core mission of what they were designed to do. And a lot of that has to do with leadership from the governor's office down, and some of the people that he's put in place, some of his directors that have a more conservative view of what government is supposed to do.
So would you say that the mission creep, in the past that can drive spending? Because what we see a lot of times, like you were saying with these agencies, it's almost like there's never a point where we say, okay, we funded X amount of dollars, mission accomplished. The agency accomplished what it set out to accomplish this year. But instead, we kind of have, this idea where no, we need more money next year than we got last year, and
Right, and we're starting to see that culture change. And again, unfortunately, this doesn't make the news as much as I think it should. But we had another director of the pharmacy board, for example, came before us, and the number of pharmacists in the state is growing, and so because of that, the licensing, all that is becoming not more complicated, but there's more paperwork and more work to do because you're overseeing maybe twice as many pharmacists as there used to be. And what the agency decided to do is, instead of hiring more full-time people, is they're hiring during, say, the summer or spring break, they're hiring college interns to come in, let them help with that extra load for a couple of weeks. And what it does is it gets those college interns, gives them some, real-world working experience, gets them the chance to, get some work experience, and that saves the state from having to hire 2 or 3 or 4 new employees. And so that's another thing. Under the governor, we have reduced the size of the number of state employees by 1,500. And so as time goes on, we'll continue to work towards trying to make government more efficient at trying to get done the job that it's supposed to be doing.
We're talking with State Representative Stephen Meeks, State Representative for District 67. Now, that's what part of Faulkner County is that, Stephen?
It's Central Faulkner County. It's Western Conway, Greenbrier, Bologna.
Okay. So we're running out of time here. Last question, though. What do you see some of the big issues? I know you talked generally just now about shrinking government, but what do you see some of the big issues that are coming down the pike in the session? Some people talk roads. Others maybe look at some of the battles we fought last year with internet sales tax. Of course, now it's the Supreme Court says that's constitutional. What are your thoughts?
I think the roads and taxes are going to be two of the large things we're going to be talking about. For me, as chair of the technology committee, I'm looking at some of the ways that the state government, how the agencies are sharing data with each other, looking for efficiencies there, also cybersecurity. I'm also looking at, and unfortunately we probably won't have time to get into this, there's a new technology coming down the line that allows companies to microchip their employees, and I'm looking at putting in legislation in place to regulate how that happens so that an employee doesn't feel like they're forced to take it, that it remains a voluntary, when that technology does come to our state.
Yeah, that is terrifying. That is terrifying. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. There's places in Wisconsin that have already done it. There's an article in the BBC came out in the last day or so about companies that are looking to do that to employees in Britain. So, that technology is coming, and unless we get the rules in place for it now, it could create quite a mess. So,
well, I definitely want to research that. That is something else. State Representative Stephen Meeks, appreciate you spending some time with us this morning, sir, and talking about that appropriation process. It can be confusing to the average person who's not down there every day, and appreciate the work you're doing. Okay.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it, and happy belated Veterans Day to our veterans, and happy service people. Absolutely.
Stephen Meeks, everybody. Yes, Veterans Day was yesterday. We just had talked earlier with State Representative Brant Smith, who was on the program, and we talked a little bit about Veterans Day then as well. Of course, it was yesterday was the Veterans Day, and then today it's observed. Yeah, exactly. And so then we have, I guess, some international news. We talked about the first part of the hour when it comes to what happened over in France with the French President Macron, who would be speaking German. He would be speaking German if it wasn't for the United States storming the beaches of France. We will be back in a moment. Reset back in a moment.
If you believe the Second Amendment protects your right to defend your home with a firearm, where do you turn if the government confiscates your gun? To the courthouse. The Founding Fathers created your Seventh Amendment right to a civil jury to protect your freedoms. The courthouse is where you fight the overreaching hand of government. And the Brad Hendricks Law Firm is where the fight starts. Call the Brad Hendricks Law Firm at 501-221-0444. The Brad Hendricks Law Firm in Little Rock, standing ready using the Seventh Amendment to protect your Second Amendment rights. Russellville-based firearms manufacturer Omega are making clones of the most notable German firearms in the world. These delayed rotor-lock firearms have been and are currently used by law enforcement and military worldwide. At Omega, they manufacture their guns right here in Arkansas and produce the best reproduction in the marketplace that comes with a complete 5-year warranty. At Omega, they take firearm manufacturing seriously and offer discounts to active and retired law enforcement. Whether you're using Omega firearms to defend the public, defend your family, or for target practice, Omega has your back. For pricing, go to omega-guns.com. That's omega-guns.com. If you're like me, you believe that small business is the heart of Arkansas's economic engine, and it should be viewed that way by the politicians in Little Rock. Conduit for Commerce also believes, like you and I believe, policies that achieve less regulation and lower taxation help small business in Arkansas thrive. Other policies like small, constitutionally consistent government and reducing citizen dependency on government keeps it from growing and expanding its influence on our daily lives. Conduit for Commerce works every day to educate the general public and legislators on these important priorities in the name of Arkansas small business. By the way, contributions to Conduit for Commerce are tax deductible. Log on now to conduitforcommerce.org and click on Contact Us on the right side of the page. That's conduitforcommerce.org. Go there now and learn the facts on protecting small business in Arkansas.
Closer to what in the book I call an interest group democracy, where it's really a matter of groups grasping for whatever spoils they can get from the government.
Let me ask you this, is kind of our last question here. Do you think you mentioned earlier that you don't really see any huge movements when it comes to draining the swamp? Do you think that's because maybe some of the substance that President Trump is attempting to do isn't happening, or do you think the system resisted because of his style? Potentially, that you hear a lot of people say, well, really like what's happening, but yeah, sometimes I don't always agree with the approach or that sort of thing. What are your thoughts about what's going on right now?
I think that the real problem is, frankly, President Trump's "drain the swamp" is a great line, but where's the policy that he's put behind it? And when did
Need your daily news fix? Don't forget to tune in to Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
And here we are. Welcome back. Hey, thanks for starting the beginning of your week with us here. It's the intersection of conservative ideas and reality. We are building a liberty machine. We want you to be a part of that liberty machine. And one of the ways you can do it is to go to our YouTube channel. And when you go to Conduit News YouTube, you want to click the subscribe button and click the little bell to receive notifications when new videos are uploaded, when the broadcast is live. And not only are we live on, radio stations, affiliates across Arkansas, but we are also live every day on the internet, where you can watch the program, watch me do the show live, and watch our guests that we have in studio or on the phone. And anyway, it'll really enhance your experience. Talk Business and Politics reporting back on November the 8th that Robert Mowry is leaving the governor's office and launching a lobbying firm. This Robert Mowry is was a staffer, and he announced that he has formed a lobbying service called Broadview Strategies. So that is now what's going to happen. He says, "I will always appreciate the opportunity Governor Hutchinson gave me to serve the people of Arkansas. I could not have asked for a better 5 years working with the governor and his team." Maury said his company will also partner with Shiloh Strategic Advisors, a public relations affairs firm in Little Rock founded by Bill Vickery, Mitchell Lowe, and former state representative John Burris. This is going to be quite the team here, folks. This will be quite the special interest team. And let me go ahead and just do a free advertisement for these people. I'll just tell you like it is. You want some government contracts? These would be the people that you need to contact. The ones that are in this article. I'm just telling it like it is. This is, I mean, if you want to be considered for government. Now, if you use these people and you pay them, and then you get government contracts or government favoritism in any way, just so you know, you will be expected to tithe a portion of that government money back to government protectionist status quo political action committees that will support the candidates, that will, make sure that Little Rock stays, that this whole it's basically like a transaction security fee to make sure that other transactions like the one that you want to engage in will continue in the future, as long as we make sure we have our PACs funded with government money. But, I mean, it went to you first, the private person, the private entity of some sort, then you tithe it back to the PACs. And that is exactly how it works. So, anyway, the telephone number, you can call or text throughout the day, 870-275-9799. You can leave us a voice message if you like. You can check out this program over at Conduit News, and you can get the podcast for free and the video archives for free and all of that. Folks, yesterday was the 100th year anniversary since World War I ended. The mechanized slaughter of our fellow human beings. And French President Macron is saying that we risk raising the demons that caused World War I when we focus on nationalism instead of, he said that nationalism is not patriotism. He said that nationalism is treasonous. This is the French President Macron. He is projecting on his opponent, President Trump, the very thing he is guilty of. Does anybody really think that President Trump wants World War I to happen all over again? Does anybody think that the president wants a war to happen? No, but he is standing up for the patriotism of this country, or he has patriotism or nationalism. He wants to stand up for America first on the global stage. Then he wants to work with other people, but not if it means America has to be thought of less than it is, or, has to take a backseat and participate in all these bad deals. That's what nationalism is to Trump, and it's opposite of what Macron feels, which is the sovereignty of France is not that great. We need to have the European Union. We need to oppress all these people, and we need to take their money and then send it back to them with strings attached and all this other stuff. I mean, that, ladies and gentlemen, is the world. That is what would cause a war. When you trample people's rights and people don't have the ability to govern themselves, that's what causes wars in this world that we live in. Not people who want to stand up for their own sovereignty, their own nation, their own borders, their own tax dollars, their own government, their own republic, their own elections. That doesn't cause wars. I mean, other people can be offended by that, and then they get involved, and that is what the French president is doing here. On the anniversary of World War I, no less. Or the end of World War I, rather. Speaking of elections, we have this electoral debauchery going on in Florida, which is, the media is telling you not real, but it is very much real. It's very much real that the Democrats are trying to steal this election. There's plenty of evidence already for it, that they're trying to keep people in the dark. Anytime you're not transparent when you're counting votes, we can infer that you're trying to do something illegal. So, I personally hope that these people who are finding boxes of ballots, I mean, what are we supposed to believe? What are we supposed to believe? I found a box of ballots. I found a box of ballots. I found another box of ballots. What are we supposed to believe? We're not going to trust you. And the Democrats would be doing the same thing if the shoe were on the other foot, by the way. And this just happens to be the two counties that, couldn't do what every other county did. Counties that were ravaged by hurricanes did and comply with the law. They can't comply with the law. They've already violated the law. They're continuing to violate the law. I don't think they comply with the judge's order that came out on Friday. The deadline was 7 p.m. Friday. They certainly missed the deadline. I don't know. They may have complied by now. Folks, we'll talk to you tomorrow. Arkansas, have a great day. Be safe.